Artificial intelligence is the defining technology of our times. It will amplify human ingenuity. It will transform key industries that underpin the Australian economy, and it will help us solve humanity's next future challenge. That said, the future's already here. AI is already improving the different layers of our lives today. At its core, AI models comprise of layers and layers of mathematical equations. I know they might seem a bit intimidating on the screen, but it gets easier, I promise. These equations learn from the data that we provided, and as a result, they mimic human capability. Turns out, everything is a number. The wavelength in our voice, the vivid colors in images, and how we express ourselves in writing. Everything is a number. And through this data conversion, AI models are then able to learn the inherent patterns in the data that we provided, and then generate out a probability distribution, like you can see on the screen. And it's a distribution like this that can predict the COVID risk for the new grandparents as they fly from Melbourne to Sydney for the very first time to meet their grandchild. It's a distribution like this that can optimize supermarket supply chains and in turn lower the monthly grocery costs for the young family in Brisbane. And it's a distribution like this that can estimate and predict bushfire warnings and alerts, empowering the Rural Fire Service in New South Wales to do more with less time and serve our community better. AI isn't innovation for innovation's sake. Rather, a scientific tool, and when wielded responsibly, influences for deeper societal impact. So I get at this point, you wouldn't be very surprised if I were to tell you that the vast majority of venture capital, private equity, the startup ecosystem, and the Fortune 500 globally have also identified this large market opportunity. And in Australia, we're simply just getting started. The Australian federal government has invested around $250 million in building out our national AI strategy. Who will we become, and what will we do with AI? And from a Microsoft lens, when Australian businesses invest in building out a digital strategy where AI is part of it, they see roughly 9x or 5x additional value being created from an apps or analytics opportunity, respectively. So with this in mind, you and I suppose Australia, can continue to pioneer and innovate with AI. But these stats do bring up the inevitable question: how will AI truly impact the different layers of our lives, our day-to-day experiences, our society, and our future? Let's explore deeper. Turns out AI is already deeply embedded into our day-to-day experiences, both indirectly and directly. Indirectly, AI sits behind some of our favorite applications and lower the time of use and the cost friction for us. Take Spotify, for example. Spotify uses AI algorithms that work behind the scenes, and in turn, from there, it streamlines the application for us by automating the process of multimedia captioning and also content editing. So not only does that give us the opportunity to connect deeper with the art that we admire, so next time that you use the app and you see your favorite lyrics or podcasts being transcribed, keep in mind that it was an AI algorithm that was working behind the scenes to provide that for you. The benefit of that is also digital businesses and startups that use Spotify's APIs for their own products. And in turn, that lowers the product development process for them. Another great example is Xbox. Xbox uses general adversarial networks, or GANs for short, to generate out cleaner and crisper graphics, allowing for a more visually immersive experience for gamers worldwide. In parallel, they also run recommendation engines, connecting gamers globally to their next favorite game, genre, and connected experience. So keep in mind, It will be AI that connects the 13-year-old girl in Adelaide to her next favorite game as she creates out her own streaming digital business for the first time. Directly, AI offers us deeply personal and connected experiences to the industries that matter for us, like fashion. Take ASOS, for example. In a fiercely competitive and trend-driven fashion world, ASOS needs to remain competitive and also customer-centric. To solve this, ASOS uses targeted brand recommendations, or AI algorithms, behind the scenes to connect its 20 million global shoppers worldwide, like you and I, to styles based on our budget and our own profiles. In turn, this allows ASOS to understand and reduce supply chain waste because now they have a deeper understanding of demand forecasting and planning, allowing them to meet emerging regulation for ISO standards in sustainability. But on an individual lens, it'll be these AI algorithms that empower the 16-year-old girl in Perth exploring fashion for the very first time by suggesting graphic tees or white Converse sneakers, allowing her to create and craft her own unique identity and confidence in the world. Westpac is another great example. They recently used a virtual agent to connect consumers that bank with Westpac, and it now handles around 70 to 80% of the bank's inquiries at a fraction of the cost and time, both for the institution and for the consumer. So not only does that give us a quicker time of use with the platform itself, but when you do look at targeted demographics like retirees, they don't need to remember their PINs or their passwords, but instead it lowers their security risk and time and cost friction as well when they are banking with Westpac. Looking deeper into all of these examples, these applications have one thing in common: an AI agent working behind the scenes, anticipating our unspoken needs based on our own previous actions, connecting us deeper to our purpose and empowering us to do more. With outcomes like these, it's not a stretch to say AI will become increasingly omnipresent in our day-to-day lives going forward. In the future, we will have more quicker and personalized experiences with this AI agent. It will know your world, your context, and what matters to you. And much to our benefit, the power in this is a more secure, connected, and informed experience with the applications that influence how we interact with society at large. From a commercial standpoint, creating value from AI means doing AI at scale in the key industries that underpin the Australian economy. Take, for example, education, healthcare, and sustainability. AI will and can transform these industries, and specifically by streamlining processes, pushing us forward for a citizen-first experience and more informed policy and strategy. Take education, for example. During the pandemic, the University of New South Wales used machine learning algorithms to identify students at a higher risk of academic failure. With these algorithms, they were able to achieve around a 90% pass rate overall. Not only is that a superb result, it's actually quite astonishing given that this was during the heat of the pandemic. So not only did AI empower University of New South Wales to look internally and revisit their strategies, their processes, and their tactics, it supported the pandemic generation coming through the education, the education that they sat at the university as well. So it was AI that put the 18-year-old international student that attended University of New South Wales during the pandemic and also had accessibility requirements from working remotely first. The beauty of that story is it shows how AI can and will transform situations where responsiveness and flexibility is crucial. And in pandemic-going times, AI will continue to be our greatest ally when we need to. COVID forced Austin Health in Victoria to build and anticipate demand and also lower the risk of transmission. And as a result, the hospital used AI algorithms to monitor and predict the symptoms of recovering patients. And in turn, that empowered the health team across Austin Health to understand the length of stay for a patient in the hospital, and also estimate and forward plan for the necessary human and non-human resources that would be needed. It was the AI algorithm that put the patient with underlying health conditions in Melbourne first. And speaking of times when responsiveness is dire, AI will continue to be one of our hero tools as we look at climate change and protect our endangered species, like the Kakadu National Wetlands. Under the direction of Indigenous rangers, drone footage has been captured off the national park, and using computer vision algorithms, we've been able to streamline the process to detect, alleviate, and de-risk habitats that are endangered. It was AI in this case that put our endangered species first. Looking to the future and seeing these common themes across these stories, as the Australian market matures, we know that we will see more connected industry solutions and systems, empowering us for a citizen-first experience and more deeper and, I guess, fundamentally personal policy and strategy. Speaking of sustainability, as you can tell, many of the examples and stories I've shared today, they rely on human input to act on and interpret the results of AI. Styling and gaming recommendations, interpretation of at-risk students, patients, and also endangered species. But as we evolve, so does our approach to AI. In the future, AI will be based on reinforcement learning, leading us to sustained innovation first. It will be able to sense, plan, and act just by observing its own changing environment. And that's achieved through simulation, where the AI agent learns through experience and a reward mechanism, a lot like how we learn as well. Interacting with its environment, the agent tries to reach its goal and is then rewarded or penalized along the journey. As a result, it learns which pathways promote progress and which pathways hinder progress. Reinforcement learning is a lot like what we see AI being represented in arts and entertainment, an AI agent that over time learns autonomous decision-making. And at Microsoft, we're thinking about how we can achieve that future with autonomous systems. Recently, our Microsoft research team built the infinite soaring machine. AI keeps the machine in the air without an engine, but instead by autonomously finding and catching rides on naturally occurring air thermals, a lot like how birds stay aloft. For a machine to do that, it requires complex AI algorithms and to identify things like wind speed, air temperature, direction, and areas where it's not permitted to fly. The benefit of this is that this infinite soaring machine will be able to provide internet connectivity in rural parts of the country, but also monitor crops in agricultural areas as well, for example. And what that gives rise to is aerial robotics, or AirSim, at Microsoft. AirSim will help us develop self-driving cars. Using AI algorithms, AirSim provides 3D environments that use diverse conditions. For people to depend on AI to do complex things, like help them drive their cars, these systems will need to make complex decisions on a variety and multitude of different variables: human emotion, traffic, weather, construction, and so on and so forth. Sustained innovation in the real world requires very little room for error, but it is an approach that we're aiming to research and develop over time. And whilst these themes and stories that I've shared today sound incredibly exciting, as AI becomes more and more intrinsic into our day-to-day lives and our societies, we must do it responsibly and focus on ethics, trust, fairness, and inclusion. Building AI at scale in an ethical way means that we must build AI in a deeply human way, with artists' eyes, with the scientist's mind, and with the humanist's heart. Creating scaled value in a commercial way from AI requires us to have the same guardrails as we would with a building: multidisciplinary teams equipped with diverse ideas in architecture, tooling, compliance, and in risk. The impact that AI has made, will make, and will continue to make is profound. but it is just a tool. Creating impact in our day-to-day, our society, and our future starts with you and with us. It's our passion, your ingenuity, and our collective creativity that will solve humanity's next future challenge, augmented with artificial intelligence. Thank you.
Hello, thank you all. That was amazing, Thasmika. We all just marinated in the intelligence of Thasmika, and it feels really good. My name is Elise Popwell, and I'm the editor of The Oz, a brand new news publication run entirely by a group of very intelligent young women who are committed to digital storytelling in the ways that you want to receive news. There's a little gift from us in the goodie bags later on. While this is fresh in your mind, please do use this opportunity to reflect on the keynote and provide questions through the Slido link here. We only have 10 minutes, so let's get straight into it. The infinite soaring machine. What? That is amazing.
Me too. That was my reaction.
That is the most impressive use of AI I've ever heard of.
Yeah.
What example would you give when someone says, what's the most impressive use of AI these days?
I think it's probably that self-driving cars example. I think we're still working towards developing it out, but with the algorithms that we're focusing on in AirSim, it's creating an open ecosystem. So it's inviting developers and people like you, really, to come and build the community with us. The benefit of not just self-driving cars, because that will take some time, sentient AI will take some time, but we can apply that research in areas like the infinite soaring machine, in understanding healthcare examples, or in sustainability, using drone footage to ensure that we are looking after our species as well. So my passion point is in that autonomous systems example, but it's maintaining how we do that at scale.
Amazing, really is. So there's a lot of discussion about ethics in AI, and you may have seen the so-called Sentient Google chatbot earlier this week that caused a stir. So how are businesses and developers embracing privacy and ethics when it comes to AI?
Yeah, so I think disruption has always been part of any sort of generational shift, and that's going to continue with AI as well. But underpinning any sort of technological revolution has always been some sort of assurance or insurance layer that's protecting the consumer, which is all of you here. And discrimination or bias that occurs in AI, that can happen at any given time, and it's because we're not maintaining our data. And we're not looking for the insights that might actually result or accumulate in bias itself. So how developers and businesses can work to resolve these issues is by focusing on key checkpoints when they are doing their product development and ensuring that they are looking for proper model bias, responsible AI techniques, and then also there's an entire business out there that I think is focusing on building trust and assurance in AI models and algorithms itself, and making sure that we are reconciling the data and we're getting a result that is fair and responsible for everyone. I think from, I guess, a Microsoft lens, we do have a range of tools that can support that, like hacks, for example, so you're able to support and build AI algorithms that focus really on human-centric designs, that what we're building is inclusive and accessible to everyone. Another great one, I believe, is Econ ML. Very cool. Uses causal inference, aka hard maths, to support policy decision makers in when they are creating a tax policy. Is this fair? Am I excluding people from creating this policy? And what would be the result on them as well? So different variety of tools, but I think overall a massive opportunity for businesses and startups out there to focus on building products that are baked in with responsible AI overall.
Yeah, and you touched on Kakadu as an example earlier, but what promises can AI make in relation to the climate crisis?
Yeah, so I think fundamentally a lot of these predictions can be used, and I mentioned it a bit earlier, in detecting for bushfires, but also for rising sea levels and so on and so forth. I think the example that I gave with Kakadu National Wetlands and any future example when it comes to AI in sustainability, it's only going to be dependent on the quality of the data that we provided. And I think there's a piece in there on how we create this open ecosystem for data coming from academia, from research, from corporates, from you and I, so that we have this connected sort of ecosystem, and from there you can use that to create and understand what your own digital or sustainability footprint looks like overall. But another good example is the Yield. I've actually worked with them recently. They're an ag tech startup in Sydney. Go check them out. They're fabulous. They predict microclimate predictions for farmers by using IoT sensors in farms. So they detect things like moisture on leaves, sunlight, temperature, so on and so forth. And from these data points, they collate them and create AI algorithms to understand what the climate would look like in a specific spot in a farm. And from there, farmers are a lot more empowered to understand what supply chain looks like, what wastage looks like, and how we can actually do sustainable farming without wrecking the planet, as Roz, the founder, says.
So if someone comes up to you and they say, I'm not in any way initiated in machine learning, AI, anything like that, I'm worried about losing my job to AI or my skills becoming redundant. What do you say to that?
It's a fair concern. I think it's a really understandable sort of opinion, and we need to do a better job at de-risking that. I think fundamentally that opinion comes from conservatism, but it's an understandable one. We need to make sure that we're clarifying with our future generations that we don't want to take anything away. We want to empower and help you grow and continue to flourish there. I think there's the perception in market, and I mentioned this on Thursday night, but if we stop viewing AI as a net new solution, a net new product, a net new business, but rather how it can be augmented into what we already do, into current legacy systems, for example, or current products, view it as that next value add layer, I would think that we are shifting the perception away from it just being it's going to take our job away or automate this entire process away from us, but rather look at it as augmenting and empowering us to do our job in a more efficient way or a more productive way as well. And when we switch that mindset, I think there's the opportunity to recognize that it's a focus on upskilling. And I think, Louise had mentioned that in her panel session as well. It's an upskilling conversation. You can go from a business analyst to learn the data science skills, or you can go from a consultant to learn the machine learning skills, and so on and so forth. It's about what does the future look like and how can we build it together, rather than necessarily being scared about it.
Yeah, and I mean, next time we're thinking, AI is so scary, we can think of Thasmika's smiling face up here, and this is the face behind AI. So just final one before we go over to audience questions, and jumping off that, can you share your expert prediction about what the role of AI might be in our lives, and specifically our workplaces in maybe 5 years from now?
Yeah, I think, as I touched on in the speech, I think it will become increasingly omnipresent in many of our processes. But to quote Satya, who's our Microsoft CEO, if the operating system was the first runtime, if the browser was the second runtime, the AI agent's going to be the third runtime. And I think what he means by that is an embedded AI agent into our systems, connecting us to quicker sort of experiences with our colleagues, with our team members, and also kind of reflecting on the fact that AI exists at scale already. It's in Canva, it's in Atlassian, it's in PowerPoint, in Excel, and so on and so forth. I think what we'll see in the future is a deeper sort of exaggeration of that, where you're working in conjunction with this AI agent to have these more connected experiences with your colleagues and with your own overall organizational goals. And the benefit of having an AI agent embedded into your organization is, I guess, the byproduct of cultural and innovation transformation in organizations itself. It will create a mindset shift. It will talk about experimentation and a culture of innovation, and hopefully lower the risk appetite that most organizations face with that.
Thank you. Let's go over to some audience questions now, and there are so many coming through. I'm sorry, we probably only have time for one or two, but here's one. How can we trust and know AI is in everyone's best interest when there isn't enough people of colour, women, and queers working in the space?
Great question. And you're absolutely right. I think whatever we need to be doing, and I think I touched on it a little bit earlier, with responsible AI, we need diverse people to help understand, is the data reconciling, and having these perspectives come into the decision-making process a lot earlier in the life cycle rather than seeing the outcome of it at the very end. So in truth, we have a long way to go, and we'll always have a long way to go as we continue to recognize our own ingrained biases in society. But the best way that we can face that is educating ourselves on responsible ML, responsible AI toolboxes and toolkits that are focused on fairness and accuracy as well.
I mean, that sounds like an opportunity for everyone here to get involved.
Absolutely, and it's about the skilling conversation as well.
So there are 2 questions here. I'm sorry, because this is a bit of a can of worms that I opened, but can you speak to the recent report of Sentient AI and what it means, positive and negative?
Great question. I think we are very far away from a sentient AI. If you look at things like the infinite soaring machine or drone footage, as I mentioned, a lot of these examples are still controlled by humans. They still require our input to act and interpret on the results. And truthfully, if you look at a sentient AI, and I did read the report, and there were some leading questions in there as well, having a sentient AI means that would need very advanced compute power to train on millions and millions of parameters, and I don't believe we're just at that point yet. So I'm not too sure how much truth that is in that claim. That's my personal opinion here, but I think we're a far way to go. We'll see how that develops in software and hardware and what that means at scale, and I think that's probably going to be the 2 influencing factors going forward.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Thasmika. We all got so much out of that. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.